The lemon oil was acrid in the back of her throat. Maya polished the silver frame with small, fierce circles, her movements the only sound in the cavernous study besides the ticking of a grandfather clock. The glass was cool beneath her knuckles. She was not supposed to touch the personal effects. The head housekeeper had been clear on that. But the dust had been a gray film over the faces of the two young men in the photograph, and that had felt like a second death. She heard it before she saw it. A low, electric whir, almost silent on the thick Aubusson rug. The sound of immense weight moving with unnatural grace. Her blood went cold. She had thought the room was empty. But he was here now, and she could not leave. The rules of the Falcone estate were simple and absolute. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not make eye contact with the master of the house. And never, under any circumstances, enter the West Wing study after 5 o'clock. Maya had broken all 3 in her first week. She set the silver frame back on the marble mantelpiece, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She kept her back to him, her gaze fixed on the reflection in the polished stone. She saw the dark shape of his wheelchair halt in the doorway, a silhouette of power and stillness. The dust returns, a voice said from behind her. It was not loud, but it filled the entire room, a low baritone that vibrated through the floorboards. It is a battle you will never win. Maya flinched, her hand still hovering near the frame. She was supposed to be invisible, a ghost in a light blue uniform who emptied wastebaskets and wiped away fingerprints. She was not supposed to have a conversation with Nico Falcone. No one did. The staff whispered that he had not held a real conversation, one that was not an order or a threat, in 20 years. Not since the accident that had taken his brother and the use of his legs. She turned slowly. He was exactly as the whispers described, and yet entirely more. He was not an invalid. He was a king on a throne of chrome and black leather. His shoulders were broad enough to block the doorway, straining the fabric of his tailored dark shirt. His hands rested on the wheels of his chair, long-fingered and perfectly still, but they looked like they could crush stone. His face was all harsh angles and shadow, a face carved from granite and dissatisfaction. And his eyes. They were the darkest, coldest gray she had ever seen, fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. She opened her mouth to apologize, to explain, but her throat was dry. Instead, what came out was a nervous rush of words. Well, you have to try, don't you? Otherwise, what's the point? You just surrender to the dust. Let it win. And then where are you? Living in a dusty house. That's where. Silence. The clock ticked, each second a hammer blow. She had done it. She had babbled at Nico Falcone. Her tenure here, the job she desperately needed to pay for her sister's mounting medical bills, was surely over. She braced for the dismissal, the cold command to get out. He did not tell her to leave. He simply wheeled himself further into the room, the chair moving with a silent, predatory glide. He stopped beside a massive mahogany desk, his gaze sweeping over the polished surface she had just cleaned. "What is your name?" "Maya," she managed, her voice a squeak. "Maya," he repeated. The name sounded different in his mouth. Not softer, but heavier. Weighed and measured. He looked from the desk back to her. "You talk too much." It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. She knew it was true. When she was nervous, words spilled out of her, a clumsy defense against silence. "I know. I'm sorry. It's a problem. My mother always said my tongue was going to get me into trouble." "Your mother was a wise woman," he said, his expression unchanging. Before she could dig her own grave any deeper, a tremor ran through the house. It was a low, guttural roar that vibrated up through the soles of her sensible shoes. The crystal glasses on a nearby bar cart chimed nervously. Maya's eyes shot to the tall arched windows that overlooked the front drive. A plume of black smoke was rising against the twilight sky, just beyond the ornate iron gates of the estate. In the next instant, the world exploded in a shower of glittering chaos. The windowpane nearest to her shattered inward, a shockwave of sound and force throwing her sideways. She cried out, stumbling, her arms flying up to shield her face from the spray of glass. But something else blocked the way. An arm, hard as iron and wrapped in expensive cotton, slammed across her chest, shoving her down. Nico had moved his chair with impossible speed, positioning himself between her and the window. His other arm came up, shielding her head as shards of glass rained down around them, peppering his back and shoulders. He was a wall, a fortress. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and something sharp, like ozone. She was pressed against the unyielding metal of his chair, her face buried in the fabric of his shirt. It smelled of cedar and something else. Something clean and cold, like steel. She could feel the solid, corded muscle of his arm holding her in place, the heat of his body a stark contrast to the chilling fear that had seized her. The immediate danger passed. The last of the glass tinkled to the floor. The house fell into a new kind of silence, punctuated by distant, frantic shouting from outside. He did not move. His arm remained a protective barrier over her. She could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart against her ear. It was the calmest thing in the entire world. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice a low growl right beside her head. Men in dark suits flooded the room, their movements fluid and practiced. They spoke in low, urgent tones, their eyes scanning the windows, the doorway, the grounds outside. One of them, a man with silvering temples and a grim face, knelt beside the wheelchair. "Boss." A car bomb at the gate. "The Morettas are sending a message." Nico's grip on her did not lessen. He looked past the man, his cold gray eyes scanning the wreckage of his study. "The message is received." His gaze finally dropped to Maya, who was still huddled under his arm. He saw the terror in her eyes, the fine dusting of powdered glass on her cheek. He saw something else, too. A flicker of defiance. A refusal to completely fall apart. "Did you see the car?" he asked her, his voice devoid of any emotion. She swallowed, nodding. "A black sedan. It drove past twice. I noticed it because it didn't have a license plate. I thought it was strange." The silver-haired man, Luca, looked at Nico. A silent communication passed between them. A witness. She was a witness. Nico finally released her. The loss of his warmth was immediate and sharp. He addressed Luca, without looking at Maya. "The estate is on lockdown. No one in or out. She stays here. Put her in the East Wing guest suite. She is under my protection until this is finished." The words were not a comfort. They were a sentence. Maya scrambled to her feet, brushing glass from her apron. She had believed she was just a cleaner, an anonymous employee in a house full of secrets. But the world she thought she was in had just been shattered along with the window. Now she was something else. A piece on a board she did not understand, owned by a man who did not smile. She had thought she could just quit, walk out those gates, and return to her simple, complicated life. But the gates were locked, the enemy was sending messages and fire, and the most dangerous man in New York had just declared that she belonged to him. The days that followed blurred into a routine of luxurious confinement. Maya was moved into a guest suite larger than her entire apartment, with silk sheets and a bathroom carved from white marble. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage. She was still expected to perform her duties, but her world had shrunk to the polished hallways and silent, opulent rooms of the Falcone mansion. She saw Nico only at a distance. A glimpse of his wheelchair gliding down a corridor, or the back of his head as he held court in the library with his men. The silence of the house was heavier now, thick with unspoken tension. She learned his story in pieces, whispered by the other staff. They spoke of the ambush 20 years ago, of Nico and his older brother, Marco, inseparable. Marco was the heir, the charming one. Nico was his shadow, his enforcer. The Moretti family, their rivals then as now, had caught them on a quiet road. A spray of bullets. A fiery crash. Nico had been dragged from the wreckage, his spine severed. Marco had not. Nico had inherited the family, the fortune, the war, and a lifetime of guilt in a wheelchair. No one had seen him smile since. The quiet war with the Morettas simmered outside the estate walls, but inside, Maya fought her own battle against the crushing silence. She started talking again. Not to anyone in particular, just to the rooms she was cleaning. She would describe the patterns of sunlight on the floor, critique the wilting posture of a ficus tree, hum a half-remembered tune. It was a small rebellion, a way to remind herself that she was still there. One afternoon, she was dusting the vast, silent library. It was his real office, more so than the study. Bookshelves stretched 2 stories high, filled with leather-bound volumes that smelled of dust and knowledge. She was on a rolling ladder, reaching for a high shelf, when she started chattering to a bust of some long-dead Roman. "You know, for a guy made of marble, you look awfully stressed," she said, wiping a cloth over his stony brow. "Is it the toga? It looks drafty. I wouldn't want to face a New York winter in that. You need a scarf. A nice cashmere 1-inch. He was a Roman emperor. I doubt he was concerned with the draft." The voice came from the shadows near the fireplace. Nico was there, watching her. He had been there the whole time, perfectly still, blending into the dark wood and leather. Her heart leaped into her throat. She nearly lost her footing on the ladder. "You shouldn't sneak up on people," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "It's rude." A flicker of something, surprise, crossed his features before being suppressed. "This is my library. It is not my habit to announce my presence in my own home." He wheeled himself into a patch of afternoon sun. The light caught the silver threads in his black hair. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes. The war was taking its toll. "I was just talking," she said lamely. "I am aware," he said. He gestured to the book in his lap. "You are interrupting my reading." "Sorry," she started to climb down. "Stay," he commanded. It was not a request. He looked up at her, perched on the ladder. "Tell me what else you think the Emperor needs." She hesitated. This felt like a test. A trap. But the silence that followed was more unnerving than his question. So she answered. "Shoes. Definitely better shoes. Those sandals are a safety hazard. And maybe a subscription to a streaming service. He looks like he could use a good binge watch. Take his mind off all the empiring." She watched his face, waiting for the anger, the dismissal. Instead, his gaze held hers for a long moment. A strange, unreadable expression softened the hard lines around his mouth. It was not a smile, not even close, but it was the absence of his usual cold mask. It was in that moment, with the scent of old paper and his cedar cologne filling the air, that the ground beneath her began to shift. He was not just a monster. He was a man. A broken, dangerous man, but a man nonetheless. And she was trapped in his orbit. The danger outside the walls escalated. A shipment was hijacked. One of Nico's capos was found dead in his car. The Morettis were getting bolder, testing the strength of a leader they perceived as weakened. Nico became even more remote, a ghost of cold fury gliding through his own home. Maya felt the tension in every polished surface, every silent meal served by nervous staff. She knew she should be afraid, but her fear was being replaced by a strange, unwelcome sense of loyalty. She saw the weight he carried. She saw the way his men looked to him, their faith absolute. She saw the immense effort it took for him to maintain his iron control, not just over his family, but over his own body, his own pain. One evening, Luca, his underboss, found her in the kitchen. He was always polite to her, but his eyes were like chips of ice. "Maya, we have a problem." He explained that they had captured one of the Moretti soldiers involved in the hijacking. The man wasn't talking. Nico needed leverage. Luca had done some digging. He had found out about her sister, about the experimental treatment she needed, about the mountain of debt that had driven Maya to take this job. "The Morettis know about her, too," Luca said, his voice dropping. "They know if they squeeze you, they can get to him." The blood drained from her face. This was her greatest fear realized, that her world would infect his, and bring harm to the one person she had to protect. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Nico wants you to stay out of it. He has other methods of persuasion," Lucas said grimly. "But I think you could end this. The man we have, his name is Antonio. He has an older brother he's very close to. Maybe if you talk to him, woman to man, let him know what the Morettis are capable of. Let him know they put your family at risk. It felt wrong. Manipulative. But the thought of the Morettis knowing about her sister, using her as a pawn, filled Maya with a cold rage she didn't know she possessed. She had to protect her. Therefore, she would do what needed to be done. She agreed. Luca took her down to the cellars. The air was cold and damp. The man, Antonio, was tied to a chair in a stark, bare room. He was bruised, but defiant. Two of Nico's soldiers stood guard. Luca nodded to them, and they left, leaving her alone with the prisoner. She did not threaten him. She simply told him her story. She spoke of her sister's illness, of her quiet courage, of the bills that never stopped coming. She told him about the fear she lived with every day. Her voice did not shake. It was steady and quiet, and filled with a conviction that surprised even her. Your bosses came after my family, she finished, her eyes locked on his. They made it personal. What do you think my boss will do to your brother when he finds out? He is a man who understands loyalty. He is also a man who understands revenge. She saw the flicker of fear in his eyes. She had reached him. She had crossed a line, stepping into the darkness of this world, and she found it was not as foreign as she had imagined. When she left the cellar, Nico was waiting for her in the hallway above. His face was unreadable, a mask of shadows. Luca told me what you were doing, he said. His voice was flat. It worked, she said, her chin high. He's talking. Nico wheeled himself closer, stopping directly in front of her, forcing her to look down at him. I gave an order that you were to be kept out of this. Your enemies brought me into it, she countered, her own anger surprising her. They threatened my sister. Did you expect me to do nothing? I expected you to come to me. He bit out, a muscle jumping in his jaw. I protect what is mine. There it was again. That word. Mine. It hung in the air between them, heavy and dangerous and true. It was not a declaration of love. It was a statement of fact. A claim. In that moment, the last of her fear of him evaporated, replaced by something far more complicated. That silence was their confession. They both knew a line had been crossed. But her victory had an unintended consequence. Antonio's confession revealed more than just the Morettis plans. He revealed they had a source inside the Falcone family. A traitor. The leak had to be someone high up, someone with access to Nico's private schedule. Someone who knew his movements. Someone like Luca. The threat was not just outside the gates anymore. It was in the house, standing beside the throne. The knowledge of a traitor poisoned the air in the mansion. Trust, the currency of Nico's world, had been devalued. Meetings were held behind closed doors. Voices were kept low. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Maya watched as Nico navigated the treacherous currents, his face a mask of cold calculation. He showed no sign of suspicion toward Luca, treating his underboss with the same clipped authority as always. But Maya saw the watchfulness in Nico's eyes. He was playing a long game. She found herself becoming his shadow. She brought him his coffee in the morning, his whiskey at night. She organized the papers on his desk, her presence a quiet, constant fixture in his life. He never acknowledged it, but he never sent her away. She was the one person in the house with no ambition, no angle. Her loyalty was not to the family or the money. It was to him. One night, she found him in the library, staring into the cold fireplace. A sketchbook lay open on the table beside him. She recognized it as one she had seen tucked away on a high shelf. Hesitantly, she moved closer. The page was filled with a beautiful, intricate drawing. It was a design for a house, a modern villa of glass and stone built into a cliffside, with sweeping staircases and wide, open terraces. A house built for walking. He did not look up. I wanted to be an architect, he said, his voice quiet. Before the ambush. Before the chair. Before the crown he never wanted. Maya looked from the drawing to his face. For the first time, she saw past the mafia boss, past the cold, broken man. She saw the ghost of the boy who had dreamed of building things, not ruling them. Her heart ached with a tenderness that was sharp and painful. It's beautiful, she whispered. He finally looked at her, his gray eyes raw with a pain he let no one else see. It is a dream. And I have been awake for a very long time. He closed the book with a soft thud. The proof against Luca is in his office. A ledger. He is too arrogant to destroy it. He thinks I will never suspect him. How will you get it? She asked. He never leaves it unguarded, Nico said, his gaze turning back to the empty fireplace. I will have to force his hand. A full meeting of the capos. Here. Tomorrow night. I will confront him. It's too dangerous, she said. If you accuse him without proof, you'll split the family. They'll see it as weakness. It is the only way, he stated, his voice final. But it was not the only way. Maya knew this house now. She knew its rhythms, its secrets. She knew the cleaning schedules, the guard rotations, the brief window in the afternoon when Luca's office was empty while he took his lunch on the South Terrace. She could get the ledger. The thought was terrifying. It was reckless. It was a step into the abyss from which there was no return. But looking at Nico, at the crushing weight of the world on his shoulders, she knew she would take that step for him. The next day, as the capos began to arrive, their dark cars gliding up the long drive, Maya slipped away. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands were steady. She used her own key to enter the service corridors, moving through the hidden arteries of the mansion. She reached Luca's office undetected. The room was just as she had seen it while cleaning, filled with ornate furniture and the faint scent of his expensive cologne. She went straight to the antique desk. He was arrogant. Nico was right. He would hide it somewhere obvious. She ran her hands along the underside, searching for a hidden latch. Nothing. She checked the drawers. Locked. Her time was running out. Then she saw it. A heavy, leather-bound blotter on the desk. It was too thick. Too heavy. She lifted it. There was a false bottom. And inside, a slim, black ledger. She had it. A surge of triumph shot through her. She tucked it into the waistband of her uniform, beneath her apron. As she turned to leave, the door opened. Luca stood there, a cold smile on his lips. Looking for something, Maya? His eyes dropped to her waist, to the slight bulge under her apron. The smile vanished. I should have known he would use you. The little mouse in the walls. Two of his men moved in behind him, blocking the door. There was nowhere to run. The meeting was taking place in the grand dining room. Nico sat at the head of the long, polished table, his capos arranged on either side. The air was thick with tension and cigar smoke. Luca entered, pushing Maya ahead of him. He held the black ledger in his hand. Nico, Luca said, his voice dripping with false regret. It seems we have a thief in our midst. Your little pet was found in my office. He tossed the ledger onto the table. It slid to a stop in front of Nico. She was trying to steal this. The capos murmured, their eyes shifting from Nico to Maya. This was it. The challenge. The moment the family would either stand with their king or fracture into civil war. Nico did not look at the ledger. His eyes were fixed on Maya. He saw the fear in her face, but also the unwavering defiance. She had done this for him. He turned his cold gaze to Luca. You are right, Luca. There is a thief in this room. But it is not her, he gestured to the ledger. That book contains a record of every tribute payment skimmed, every shipment sold to the Morettas, every piece of information fed to our enemies for the past 2 years. Your handwriting, I believe. Luca laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Your word against mine. And you have been weak for a long time, old man, sitting in that chair. The family needs a leader who can stand on his own 2 feet. You are right, Nico said softly. The room went silent. I cannot stand, he paused, his eyes sweeping over the faces of his men. But I have never asked any of you to do something I was not willing to do myself. I have bled for this family. I have given everything for this family. What have you given, Luca? Besides betrayal? He then looked at Maya, and his voice changed. This woman, a stranger, has shown more loyalty in 2 months than you have in 20 years. She walked into the heart of the enemy's territory for me. For this family, he held out a hand toward her. Come here, Maya. Luca's men held her fast. But the capos were watching. They had seen Maya's courage. They had heard the truth in Nico's voice. One by one, they stood up, their chairs scraping against the marble floor. They turned to face Luca, their expressions hard. The choice had been made. Luca saw the shift. His face contorted in a mask of rage. He pulled a gun, pressing it to Maya's temple. No one is going anywhere. But Nico had been playing a different game all along. He had not been waiting for the ledger as proof. He had been waiting for Luca to overplay his hand. From the doorways, Nico's most loyal soldiers emerged, weapons raised. Luca was surrounded. He was finished. The betrayal was dealt with in the swift, brutal way of their world. When it was over, the dining room was silent again, except for Maya's ragged breathing. Nico wheeled himself to her side. His men had released her, and she stood trembling, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving her weak. He reached out and took her hand. His grip was strong, steady, an anchor in the storm. He did not thank her. He did not praise her. He simply looked at her, his gray eyes holding an emotion she could not yet name. "You are family," he said, his voice rough. "You are home." The cost of that night was high. The family was shaken, its foundation of trust cracked. But it would be rebuilt, stronger than before. Maya knew she was no longer just a maid. She was part of this dark, violent, and fiercely loyal world. She had seen its ugliness, and she had chosen to stay. Weeks later, the rhythm of the house had returned, but it was a different rhythm. Softer. The oppressive silence was gone, replaced by a quiet peace. Maya was in the library, curled in a leather armchair, reading one of the old books. She no longer wore a uniform. Nico entered, the whir of his chair a familiar, comforting sound. He stopped beside her, watching her. She looked up from her book. "You know," she said, a small smile playing on her lips, "I was thinking about that Roman emperor. I figured out what he really needs." Nico raised an eyebrow. "A dog," she said. "A big, stupid, happy one. To chew on his sandals." She looked at him, and she saw it. It started in his eyes, a flicker of light in the cool gray depths. It moved to his mouth, a slow, hesitant lifting at the corners. It was not a grin. It was not a laugh. It was a smile. The first real smile to touch his face in over 20 years. It was a new beginning, rising from the ashes of his long, cold grief. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she was the reason for it.